Okay, so good afternoon. I'm going to have two sort of presentations, really, 3 or 4 slides where I just want to go through some key messages from the Curriculum for Wales guidance, a quotation from an Estin report, and then a few examples of different spreadsheets and so on that schools have got are using across the region, and then move on to the sort of tracker, the progress record that we've developed as well. So I'm just going to share my screen, and hopefully you can see this. So I'm just going to start off really just to put some context into why we've developed what we've developed really. And these are just some sort of key messages from a variety of Curriculum for Wales guidance that talks about assessment and progression. First one being that schools, they're the ones to determine their own assessment arrangements for learning, and that will include on-entry assessments. And I know towards the end of June, start of July, the next foundation phase network will look closely or more closely on the on-entry assessments. 3 main purposes to assessment. The first one, and I think we'd all agree is the main and the most important one, is that supporting of individual learners on an ongoing day-to-day basis. That's not something that we're going to cover necessarily this afternoon. But looking at the other 2 then, in the opportunities to identify, capture and reflect on individual learner progress over time, and also understanding group progress, whatever those groups may be, in order to reflect on practice. And they're the kind of things that would generally then feed into a school development plan. Very, very important point, I think. I was a head teacher for many years, and the accountability, be it from local authorities, GWER, Estin and so on, became quite burdensome, I think. And we need to have a real change of mindset that's going to change. You know, the information gathered on learner progression, make sure it's proportionate, and it is only used within the school to directly support learner progression and to inform teaching. And in the guidance, it clearly states it should not be used for the purposes of external accountability. And the final box on the left-hand side, when assessing learners' progression, you know, it's important to use a range of assessment methods, develop a holistic picture of the learner, focusing on their strengths, areas for improvement, to take their learning forward. Also states in the guidance that the descriptions of learning should not be seen as the new levels. They should not be used to undertake specific assessment activities at each progression step, and they should not be broken down to create specific assessment criteria or to form a tick list against which learners would be assessed at a set age or a point in time. They are there to aid the planning for the teaching and learning of the learners. A key element running through the documents is that there are regular opportunities for professional dialogue between all practitioners, not only within schools, but also between schools, for example, within a cluster and so on, that gives practitioners the chance to reflect, share and discuss learning progress, and develop a shared understanding of progression. And what does that progression look like throughout the school and then the cluster? And obviously similar in a way of bringing work before for cluster moderation and so on, using examples of planning and teaching and learning and so on to aid that dialogue. And then finally, because we have given an option within our sort of progress record to develop this, is that sharing individual learner information should be done at least termly, should not be contained in large written reports, but fed back in an accessible manner, which maximizes engagement. And in the previous session that we've done on assessment and so on, we've showed examples where people have used sort of tick lists, which is quite ironic, QR codes where there have been verbal reports shared by either teachers or pupils. Teams, and if you're using things like Seesaw and so on, they all count to that sharing individual learner information. I think there's an opportunity here to really reduce workload moving forward. And the focus of this information is the progress their child is making, the future progression needs of the learner, how that can be supported at home, and their general well-being in school. And it clearly states that it's a summary of individual learner information that should be provided at the end of the academic year. So that's just some sort of background really to why we've developed what we've developed. But I'm just going to share a quote from Ysgol Bwrdd Hyfryd in Wrexham. We worked with Ysgol Bwrdd Hyfryd initially, and we developed a previous tracker. And then Estyn, probably a couple of years later, came to school. And I just want to really, you can read the whole slide, but I just want to focus really on the final one. Because whatever you use, and we've probably spent an inordinate amount of time on keeping assessment data and so on, the key thing is in the third bullet point, is the impact. And as a result, staff identify pupil-specific needs at an early stage and use their information to organise various intervention programmes and wellbeing support sessions effectively for those who need them. And I think that's the key. And there was an Estyn inspector over in Anglesey, he said, it doesn't matter even if you use the back of a cigarette packet. The important thing that you are able to identify pupils' needs and to organise the support, etc., that they need moving forward, however that may look. It's not about how much information that you are necessarily keeping. And I'm just therefore just going to show you a few others. I'm not going to be a salesman this afternoon and tell you that we really think that you should be using the tracker that we've developed. It's just one option that's available to you. And I know I've been to some of your schools, and I know I've been to other schools across North Wales, and I've actually seen really good things. And I've said, please, you don't need to use our online tracker, what we're sharing with you, because you've got things that are already in place. If you want more information, or if you want me to put in touch with people who are developing these, then I'll drop my email into the chat at some point this afternoon. Some of you know it already, and I can put you in touch with these relevant schools and so on. A simple spreadsheet, the first example, response to intervention, 3 tiers. You've got universal support, you've got targeted support, you've got intensive support. And this particular school, Ysgol Merllyn in Bagill, they just identify the health, the phonics, the spelling, the maths. They've also added Welsh and DCF, things like attendance and so on, and they allocate a colour according to where they believe the pupil's needs are. This is revised every term in pupil review meetings, and then they make a note about what intervention they are going to use. And this is what they're going to use to record from on entry all the way up to year 6. Okay, and I know there are some schools in Wrexham, for example, who are already interested and in dialogue about using this moving forward. The second example is a spreadsheet that's been developed by 4 secondary schools across North Wales. They call themselves the A55 Alliance, and I think it involves Friars, Prestatyn, Ysgol yr Alun in Mold, and another school of which I forget at this moment in time. I do apologise. And there's a range of information there, from general information about attendance, FSM statements and status and so on. There's comments about general school life, things like overall attitude to learning, attendance, behaviour, classwork and so on. It talks about suggested access to any of the following, things like nurture groups, attendance, intervention and so on. And then there's a statement in the red there about progress in learning. And there's an opportunity to share some other information as well. And as you can see, they use a colour coding along the bottom there from red, orange, green, blue and purple. As if you didn't know your colours, I do apologise. But again, I think they're going to use this as part of their transition moving forward as well, of information being passed on to the secondary school. Again, I've seen these working, and they work for the cluster or they work for the individual schools. There's more than one way of sort of recording pupil assessment data moving forward. Just another couple of examples. This has come from a school, primary school in Anglesey, where they've, they were struggling really with, sort of, there's no outcomes, there's no levels anymore, etc. But we've got here, similar to the one before, but we've got some more numerical data, as it were. And you've got pupil detail in the orange, and then in the green, you've got academic information, where they are just, they're giving a score for pupils with regard to effort, attainment, and progress. You've got some CAT scores, or Wales Reading Test, NFER, etc. The online assessments or the personalised assessments, you've got the scores there. And then they've also got some information and data, etc., with regard to well-being, a whole host of information there that they use during pupil review meetings. And again, as a recipient of information, you as a leader may think, well, that's something that would resonate with me. And that's the kind of thing that's how I'd want to keep information about my pupils moving forward. And then just the final one, something that Professor Donaldson was quite keen on. This is from Ysgol Bodau Ysgol rather than Ysgol in Bodau, and they've been Elite Creative School, and they're looking at particular skills, lifelong skills of pupils. So they've developed a rubric, again, works off Excel, where they're looking at particular lifelong skills of the learners moving forward. So moving away from the sort of traditional sort of language and maths and so on moving forward, but looking at things like participation, leadership, listening, cooperation, and so on. And I know, again, a couple of schools in Wrexham that I've shared that with, have made a link with Ysgol in Bodau, because they've shown an interest in using this either for particular projects or looking at a long-term strategy for the school. So what I want to come from there is that there is a number of ways that schools are recording data, etc. And I would suggest, it's not new, is it, that many of you will have things in place that are already suitable. So please don't think this afternoon that I'm saying, right, you've got to use the GWARE tracker, because that's not the case. And as I said, I think if I came into many of your schools, I would suggest that what you've got in place, you could already tweak and adapt. Having said that, I am now going to share my screen again and show you what we've developed. And again, the idea this afternoon is to just let you know that this is nearly finished. We've got a couple of meetings with a couple of school representatives and so on. And we also then, need to do a bit of translation work and so on. But hopefully the intention is that this will be up and running for September. We have got some schools have got a sort of draft copy who have been trialing it and so on. And if it's of use to you, get in touch and I can share it. It's based upon some similar principles of what you've seen already and on what came out from the Curriculum for Wales guidance. So it's an Excel spreadsheet. Its main use would be that you would have one spreadsheet per cohort. And we would suggest, for example, for this current nursery, that you would call this spreadsheet Nursery 2021. And then all the information for those pupils would stay on until they leave, which I believe will be about 2029-30. A little bit of work in setup, but you could use Sims to populate some of this. So initially, there is a space where you can put in a logo, simply copy and paste. And you'll see why that's there when we come to the end of the presentation. The second one then, as I mentioned earlier, would be to identify the academic years that this relates to. And again, this is there because it will feature as part of a report at the end of the year. And you've got N1, and we've taken that from PLASC, and that's your early entitlement children. N2 is your sort of, I was going to say full-time nursery, but it's part-time nursery, isn't it? And then you've got reception class, and the rest is self-explanatory. And then what we've tried to do really is think outside the box, really, is about, using color coding and thinking about, giving you options. What would you like to track? So there's some tracking criteria here. And basically, it's up to you as a school. If you chose to use this, you decide what you'd like to track. And for example, I've got to be honest, if I was back in my old school in Ysgol Houston, I would be allocating this to a support group, and I would be, you can use a number, you can use a word, whatever you want to use, and I would then decide what the criteria is. For example, the green children would have no added extra support needed. This would be intense one-to-one support. I'm not going to fill in the rest. You know, some people have said we only want to use 3 colours. Five would like 5. We've had to make decisions that, you know, we are going to stick to 4. And then the second one, you know, in this case, we're going to stick to progress. And again, you can have a discussion within staff, etc. You know, what do these mean? And it's about that discussion. There's spaces for you to put notes, there's spaces for you to put additional information, but again, you don't need to do that. Again, it's up to you. If you don't like numbers, you can change it to letters. Obviously, C will become code there, so I'll just get rid of that. So that's 2 options of things that you would like to maybe keep an eye on as you track moving forward, and it's color-based. And then the third one we put in is attitude to learning. And again, a similar process. Where you can put in a definition and so on. So it's then a case of, you know, you could break this up in different ways. We've suggested one way is that you could have maybe engagement, behaviour and well-being. But again, it's entirely up to you. There's a couple of schools who said, actually, we're not going to break it up like that. We want to just put a note in for each term so we can update it on a termly basis, and you'll see how this works in a minute. And again, you can put in the definition of the code, so you've got some consistency maybe within the school. If you want to put any additional information in, you can. Some people who've trialed it have done, some others haven't, moving forward. And then finally, it's about the learner. And those of you may be familiar with our previous tracker, etc. We've got some headings here. Now, this is to allow you to filter the information. Especially if you're in larger schools, etc., might be quite useful. Now, at the moment, we have got the sort of 5 traditional sort of headings here: FSM, EAL, more able, and so on. And then we've got 5 that you can decide. But we've made a decision now, especially in the likelihood that, for example, that FSM children, technically, if everybody's going to have free school meals in the future, and therefore we're going to leave all those up to you to decide what you want to track. So you can have that criteria if you want to then look at specific groups of children, and it could well be a yes or a no. If you're a large school and you've got 2 year 6 classes, for example, then you can put the initials of the teacher in there. Here, example, put in some information about, let's say, attendance, and you can put the criteria again, but that is for you to be able to filter the information. And then finally we get to the learners, so a little bit of setting up, and then finally we get to the learners, and this is where then you can use Sims to populate a report that will enable you then to input the learners. Now, obviously, if you're going to use this from September onwards, you would have a large number of spreadsheets to fill in initially. Like I said, Sims will be able to populate a report. But having said that, the following year, then you are only going to be doing this once for your new intake of nursery pupils. So you've got a unique reference number. You can use the UPN, you can use a number, etc. You've got the learner name, a start date. That's quite important because it will make them active. A leave date then, which will leave them on the system, but they will be inactive. And then here are all the criteria that you can get. And as you've seen, I've changed to that to poor. So it will then, so you can identify and so on. So you can put some information in there. So that's where all your information is. So a little bit of setup for admin and so on. And then we're good to go really with what we're tracking. So if I then go to N1, just to show you, because it's very simple, you've got then your pupils. So if I just go back to learner details, if I then take the UPN number and copy that UPN number, hopefully this works. If I then drop it into here, all that information that you've created, including attendance and so on. And then the attitude to learning, you noticed I changed the headings to term 1, term 2, term 3. It works across then, staff are aware of the code, and it's a case of then putting in a color, then draws the eye, and it allows you to fill in, let's say this is term 2. I won't keep on going on because I think you get the idea. But then it would allow you, for example, to use the filter to say, well, I only want to see the pupils who are of poor, who the teachers have said have got a poor attitude to learning, and I can just filter that information here. And I'll use this button to clear the information back. What we've got here then is we've got space for general comments. We've limited it to 500 characters. We're mindful of workload and so on. And we've seen 2 examples of schools. Some schools have gone for term 1, term 2, and term 3. So there's a general comment updated every term, and then it's entirely simple. But what we have also seen is that one school has said, no, we're just going to use it once. And what we're going to have is we're going to have teacher comment, we're going to record pupil comment, and we're also going to record a parent comment, maybe from a parent's evening and so on. So there's some flexibility there about how you want to use it. Schools who trialed this said we'd like some space for general tests. So for example, things like CATS or PASS, and you can put a number in because you can turn PASS into a number, or you could just make a simple comment, no concern raised from PASS and so on. So a whole host of information there. And then the spreadsheet then basically has the 6 areas of learning. We've started with health and well-being. And as you see here, we put in a support group and progress, and you can basically put in a color code. And again, you can use the filters and so on. There's space for you to put comments if you so wish. You don't have to, you can just stay with the color coding, etc. A couple of ideas that came through from here was I go to my lad's parents' evening, and a lot of teachers now are preparing sort of and typing notes that they're going to share with me and read out. And what we were suggesting here is maybe here that this is a place where those notes could be put in about each child. In the same way, you know, many schools have pupil review meetings, and this could well be a way of recording information either prior or during those review meetings about a child. But again, there's one school who says we're probably just going to use the general comments and we're not going to use all 6 AOLEs. You have that flexibility. I come across here to language literacy and communication. Again, it's the similar thing. Place for comments, but we've also put in spaces for 4 tests. And these tests, if you want to name a test, let's say reading, and then these, you'd be familiar with maybe the colors, they will give you a color. And if that's over 115, then that should turn green. So again, it's the idea being that there's a lot of information about a child can be shared on one spreadsheet, and this will follow that child through the school. If I click on the eye, rather than having to scroll across, you can go to a specific AOLE. So you don't have to look at all the spreadsheets in the same time. You may have a topic that is heavily based on expressive arts. So you may only want to write some comments in with regard to that. But I'll come back here as well. What we've also added in is a space for head teacher comments. It says at the moment head teacher's comments at the end of the year. That's going to change to head teacher's comments. So if a senior leader or head wants to make some notes based on the information here about attitude to learning, based on the general comments, then they are able to do that. I'll just clear the eye. nearly come to an end, and then I can stop, and if anybody wants to ask any questions or make any comments. The final section then, oh, by the way, what we've done here is, this is N1, so that information is there. When that child rolls over to N2, or to nursery, if they've already been in early entitlement, all you need to do is, if you copy the UPN number, move into N2 and drop that in, and all that information just carries on. If they're active and so on, and any information then you could amend and see fit. The previous data in N1 still stays there. So finally, we decided to make a learner summary. We've got a couple still to add on here. My partner in crime on working on this, Sandra, has been off work for a couple of weeks. She'll be back soon. So we will have a couple more examples as well. But any information, if I click on N1, and any information that's been inputted about a child, I'll just let that roll around a little bit. So for this pupil here, any information that I've added into this will be summarized on this information. So I typed in reading test before, the score comes in here. So it all appears here, including the head teacher comments at the end. So everything is in one place. I'll go back home, but obviously that's quite a lengthy report. So a head teacher in Wrexham basically suggested, well, you know, could we sort of have end of year reports that could be a bit more concise? So we've got 3 examples here, but we are going to develop a couple more by September. So now you've got a full report, but it hasn't got all the sort of FSM details and so on. So it will just have the general comments, no test data. It will just be the narrative that's been written about a pupil. If I change that, there might be some narrative. So anything that I've written about Bailey appears here. That's the gobbledygook I put in before. And again, the way I saw this was, if you've got a parents' evening and you've already made notes, then whether it's on screen, whether it's a Teams meeting or you know, face to face, you have those comments here in place. You're not having to duplicate and write notes in different places all the time. If I come back to end of year report, there's a different one which has the attitude to learning and general comments only. So you've got the key for attitude to learning, and you've got the general comments, and you've got the head teacher comments. Now, it's not the most aesthetically pleasing, but we have, that's why you can put in your logo here, so you can put your school logo in. But I know of some schools who have suggested, this will print out as a page, by the way, and some schools have suggested that they might put a front cover on, then you've got personalised reading tests and so on. You might have a sheet from Sims about attendance, and that will be then your end of your report. Bearing in mind, of course, that the new guidance now says it's only a summary that needs to be provided at the end of the year. So it could well be used in that way. Some primary schools have suggested as well, this is information that could be forwarded into secondary school, and these buttons here allow you to do that, because you can print an individual report, you can print you can print all the active ones, and up top here, this is where you can transfer them into PDFs. And then the final report that's on this version so far is just the general comments only, and the head teacher comments without the attitude to learning. But we are adding a couple of others as well that will have different information. And then as the child move forward, you know, if Bradley then moves into when he's in full-time nursery, then any information that's inputted about Bradley will be here, but obviously I haven't put in any information in this demonstration. So all that information, so teachers will be able to go back over a few years just to see what was written and what was recorded about each child moving forward. So that's what we've created. Lots of different features, and I would suggest maybe far too complex for the needs of some schools and so on. But the idea is to keep everything in one place, a range of narrative, color-coded information, also some tests and so on that could be used as a summary, either within the school for parents or to transfer to another school if they move forward. So there's lots of different pieces of information here. I'm going to stop sharing, and if anybody's got any questions or comments, now's the time to do it. I'm just also going to put my GWE email in the chat, so that anybody, if you're interested in this, if you want to ask me questions offline and so on, or if you want to get in touch with me about any of the other examples, etc., that I've shown, then I can put you in touch with relevant schools.